Thank you, Mariel. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. This is Tenure-Track Positions. Could I survive? Could I thrive? Before I go on any further, let me just verify. Can everyone hear me okay? Give a few chats in the chat box. All right, great. I'm going to take that as an affirmative. My name is Laura Garapi. I'm chair of the ACRL University Library Section's Professional Development Committee, and I am moderating this program. So this is part of a series of online presentations that our committee offers throughout the year, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. My colleague and fellow committee member, Christy Peters, is also here today. Thank you, Christy. She'll be here helping with some back-end issues, collating questions that come in throughout the presentation. And thanks so much, too, to Mariel Colbert from ACRL for being here to make sure we're all good to go on the technical front. It is much appreciated. This session is being recorded, and when the recording is ready, we will send the link to the video to everyone who is registered for the program. We had several folks reach out who wanted to attend but couldn't make this exact time, so we'll make sure that's available. The program will consist of a presentation today from our panelists, who I'll introduce shortly, followed by a question and answer session. Please post your questions in the chat box, and as you've seen a couple times posted in the chat window, you're going to want to select all panelists and attendees if you'd like all of the folks in the room today to be able to see your question. As I mentioned, we'll collect all of those questions and answer as many as we can at the end, or I should say the panelists will answer as many as we have time for at the end. We'll also post a link to a program assessment in the chat box after the Q&A, and we hope you'll take the time to give us a bit of feedback on the program. All right, with those announcements out of the way, I'm very happy to start today's program. We are joined by three panelists who will be talking to us today about the tenure track, and they are Karen Sobel, who is the Associate Professor and Teaching and Learning Librarian in the Fine Arts and Architecture at the University of Colorado, Denver. Karen works as a tenured librarian and performs extensive mentoring of tenure track faculty and training of new mentors for faculty across her university. Jean Springs, Assistant Professor and Collections Strategist at the Ohio State University's libraries, has held several tenure track positions at universities around the United States, and currently holds a tenure track leader position in the libraries at the Ohio State. Dr. Barbara B. Moran, Distinguished Research Professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Information and Library Science, brings over 30 years experience as an advisor and mentor to MLS candidates seeking their first jobs, and as a professor of library and information science. So thank you so much to our panel for being here, and without further delay, I will hand it over to our panelists. Karen, I think you should be able to unmute yourself. I've just given you the power.
Yes, ma'am. Got it. Hi, everyone. Well, let me just say that I'm really glad to be presenting with this group of people that I enjoy and respect really deeply. This is wonderful. All right, so we have a lot to cover today. But before we jump in, Barbara, Jean, and I made some guesses about who you might be in preparation for writing our material. So we're guessing that there are probably three main groups out in our audience: a lot of MLS students, some early career academic librarians, and then some other librarians who are intrigued by the possibilities of jobs with a research component. But whoever you are, let me just say we're really glad you came. Let me share our agenda for today. There we go, and I'll talk you through it real quickly. First, Barbara will talk about what the tenure track positions really are, what that status means, and then what's expected. And she's going to outline some alternatives to tenure track positions that are offered at many academic libraries, some similar alternatives rather. Then Jean will discuss career paths for tenure track librarians, and he's going to give us some important guidance on strategies and supports for success in your career and in your research. And then finally, I'm going to talk about how tenure track and similar positions fit into your life, and finish up with some myths, phobias, and questions related to tenure track jobs. And then we'll have questions and answers. All right, on to Barbara.
I'm very pleased to be here. As you know, today we're discussing tenure and tenure track librarianship positions in academic libraries. And I will begin the presentation by providing a few caveats about the focus of our discussion. We'll be focusing only on librarians with the MLIS or other terminal degrees who are working in academic libraries. Clerical and professional workers in libraries have their own classification systems, but we're not discussing those. And to narrow it down even more, we're looking only at a subset of all professional academic librarians, those working in libraries that offer tenure to their librarians. Although the discussion will be applicable to many librarians who are not on the tenure track. Sometimes new librarians think they will have a say in deciding how they are classified, but unfortunately, this is not true. Whether librarians are on the tenure track or not depends solely on how the professional librarians are classified by their employing institutions, and there are many varieties in these classifications. There are a lot of flavors in these classifications. For decades, academic librarians and institutions have been debating exactly how they should be classified in the academy. The focus of this debate is usually on whether academic librarians should be classified using the same system used for teaching faculty or classified using some other system. The uncertainty arises because the positions academic librarians hold are in many ways similar to those held by teaching faculty, but in other ways they are dissimilar. Typically, the prime responsibility of teaching faculty is, as the title implies, instruction. But in most institutions, teaching faculty are expected to perform other responsibilities. Most teaching faculty who are on the tenure track are evaluated in 3 areas: teaching, service, and research. Different universities place different values and weights on each of these components, but each is considered important. To meet the teaching component, faculty meet with their classes, hold office hours, and serve as advisors to students. In terms of service, they work on committees in their departments and universities. They provide service to professional and scholarly organizations, and they also often contribute additional service to their communities. And finally, teaching faculty are expected to contribute scholarship by doing research and publishing. To allow them time to perform in these 3 areas, teaching faculty have a great deal of flexibility in their work schedules, and they also typically have 9-month appointments, with the summer free to do research. Many librarians also teach and work with students as a large part of their job. However, in contrast, academic librarians usually have a 35 to 40-hour work week and a 12-month appointment. Most librarians have set schedules of desk hours and other times that they are expected to be on the job. Because of these differences, there's been a long-running dispute about the best way to classify academic librarians. Are academic librarians a subset of teaching faculty, or are they something else? Despite thousands of articles, books, and position papers written on the topic, there's still no one definitive answer, and there's definitely no one-size-fits-all model for classification. There are so many variations in the way academic librarians are classified that it's almost impossible to discuss the various schemes used to categorize them. However, the 3 major classifications are professional or administrative status, academic status, and faculty status. Let's start by looking at these 3 classifications. Librarians who are classified as professional or administrative staff have positions that are primarily focused on the professional activities of librarianship. The librarians with academic status are those with a type of quasi-faculty status. They're not considered exactly faculty, but they usually have some of the same perquisites of the faculty positions. And finally, librarians with faculty status are those who have the same status as teaching faculty. The statistics vary from year to year, but at present, approximately 50% of all academic librarians have faculty status. Although faculty status would seem to imply that it would be most applicable to librarians in public service positions, librarians with positions in all parts of the library are classified with faculty status, if that is the classification used by the overall library. Academic librarians with faculty status are usually tenure-track, but not always. And to make things even fuzzier, there are a few librarians in tenure-track positions who do not have faculty status. complicate things even further, many librarians who have academic status have forms of continuing appointment that can be very similar to tenure. So classifying academic librarians according to their status is, as you can see, a very ambiguous process. However, we really want to emphasize that there are advantages and disadvantages to each of these classifications, and none is inherently better than the others. However, it is important to know that each of these types of classifications varies in terms of the benefits conferred and the expectations required of the person in the position. So, what are the expectations and evaluation methods associated with each of the three main types of classifications? Briefly, librarians who are classified as professional or administrative are assessed by how well they perform their main job duties. So here, performance in the key task of librarianship is the primary requirement. There's typically no expectation of research, although there may be some expectation of various types of service achievements. Those librarians in the second classification system, those with academic status, often have an evaluation process similar to those of librarians with faculty status, but usually the job performance and the service accomplishments of those librarians are judged at least or more important than their research productivity. Finally, librarians with faculty status are judged by the same standards as those used to assess the teaching faculty. Those librarians are expected to do research and publish, as well as to demonstrate competency in teaching, in service, and in performing their primary duties as librarians. If they're able to demonstrate these, they are awarded tenure. As mentioned earlier, because the classifications are not distinct, it is hard to specifically delineate the various expectations for each type of classification. However, it is very important to remember that every academic library should have a clearly defined policy about how the academic librarians will be evaluated. And it is essential for any job applicant to be aware of those policies before accepting a position. If a job applicant wants to find a position that provides tenure, he or she should look for openings in institutions that provide such status. So finally, what exactly does tenure or tenure track mean? In academe, according to the American Association of University Professors, a tenured appointment is an indefinite appointment that can be terminated only for cause or under extraordinary circumstances, such as financial exigency and program discontinuation. So a person with tenure is one that has already been awarded that indefinite appointment. Someone on the tenure track is a person who is eligible for tenure. So there are a lot of advantages that come with tenure. First, tenure means that you will have a permanent appointment that will last until you retire or you leave a position. Second, tenure provides protection in cases of academic freedom disputes. Tenure protects you when you dissent from prevailing opinion, openly disagree with authorities, or spend time or resources on controversial topics. Third, tenure ensures the opportunity to engage in faculty governance, so you'll have some input into university decision-making. And finally, since tenure-track librarians are almost always those with faculty status, it provides some or all of the benefits given to faculty, including eligibility for sabbaticals, time allocated for research, and the opportunity for promotion. So if you're hired in a tenure-track position, what can you expect? Different campuses have different procedures, but typically you will begin with a 3 or 4 year initial contract that will be extended if you're making progress. To allow you to measure your progress, you should be given a copy of the promotion and tenure guidelines, and these guidelines should provide you with information to allow you to begin to amass the evidence that you will need to go up for tenure. Obviously, if you know that you have no interest or desire to do research and publish, and these are components of attaining success in a position, you should not accept a position that requires these to be successful. Next, you'll be subject to some sort of interim evaluations before it's time for you to come up for tenure. And these reviews will provide useful advice and let you know whether or not you're making sufficient progress. Then typically, in the 6th year of your initial appointment, you will submit your dossier or portfolio for consideration. This dossier provides the evidence needed to assess whether you have made sufficient progress to merit tenure. Typically, the portfolio contains evidence related to your teaching, research, and service. Most universities will ask you to provide evidence of your effectiveness at librarianship as an analogous measure to be substituted in place of or as part of the teaching criteria. Next, typically your portfolio is assessed by a committee of your peers within the library. And if your colleagues judge it to be satisfactory, it will then go up the chain to other committees, often including a divisional committee, a university-wide committee, and then finally to the president for final approval. If you're successful and are awarded tenure, then you will have that continuing appointment at the university that will last until you retire, although there is almost always a proviso that you could be terminated for cause, or in the case of financial exigency. But conversely, if you're not judged worthy of tenure, you will lose your position usually at the end of the following year. In most cases, you will receive a promotion in rank along with tenure and typically a pay raise. Usually in a tenure-track library, a new hire begins as an assistant librarian, is promoted to associate when tenure is achieved, and then has the opportunity to be promoted to full librarian. Of course, there's always further review of your work, especially when you come up for promotion. And in addition, in some institutions, there's a periodic post-tenure review of individuals in the highest ranks. So receiving tenure doesn't mean you can stop working or producing scholarship, but it does say that your peers and your institution have judged your accomplishments worthy of permanent appointment. So we've talked about the advantages, but what are the disadvantages of tenure? For librarians, in addition to their regular responsibilities, they will have to do research and publishing to get tenure. And these activities require both time and resources. They are not things that can be accomplished as an add-on or in your spare time. One of the worst case scenarios for a librarian is to be hired in a tenure-track position where he or she is expected to devote the work week to traditional librarian duties and does not have dedicated time set aside for doing research and writing, or is not given additional funding to provide assistance needed in research or writing or to do necessary travel. Another disadvantage is that some librarians have neither the desire nor the appropriate background to be successful. Many librarians enter their first job without any preparation in how to do original research, and thus find it difficult to know how to start the process. Other librarians are just not interested in research and publishing. They entered the profession because they wanted to be librarians and they want to concentrate on the library part of the job. And finally, for library administration, there's less flexibility to reallocate positions to meet changing needs if all or most of the librarians have tenure. So in summary, new librarians need to remember that different institutions use different classification schemes, and the only way new graduates looking for positions in academic libraries can choose the status they will have is by looking for positions in institutions with their preferred type of status. Job seekers do not get to select what status they will have, and although tenure-track provides multiple benefits, it is not a good fit for all. Be sure you determine whether you want to work in a tenure status position before you accept a position. But if you have decided you are interested in a tenure-track position, Jean will provide some tactics for success in pursuing tenure.
Great, thanks, Barbara. So now that Barbara has described the types of tenure-track and tenure-like positions out there and the processes involved overall, I'm going to talk a little bit about the related activities that often accompany these types of positions. While librarianship or your main job duties is the most important aspect of success in any professional position, it's often the two other parts of the triad, your research and scholarship or service, that can cause some angst for those considering or entering tenure-track positions. I'll take the next few minutes to focus more generally on these types of tenure-related activities, stressing the importance of reading and writing to scholarship and professional engagement to service. It's important to note that there is no one-size-fits-all model here, and what each of these quote-unquote mean will vary from institution to institution. But what's recommended here can generally be applied to any professional librarian position with these types of activities. Engaging in these activities, no matter what kind of position you're currently in, will help you build a professional reputation. I view these activities on a career continuum. These can be engaged in constantly or leveraged when it's most appropriate, given where you may be with your work positions. So one of my first pieces of advice is to always be reading. I'll make a quick distinction here between professional and scholarly literature. For the purposes of this presentation, professional literature is comprised of editor-reviewed publications and are generally produced by professional associations. Scholarly literature is comprised of peer-reviewed journal articles that have gone through some rigorous evaluation. In the United States and Canada, we're lucky to have a wide variety of professional literature that we can access, often built into professional association memberships with organizations like ALA and ACRL, one of its divisions, the Society of American Archivists, the Medical Library Association, the Special Library Association, et cetera. These types of publications often focus on issues at the macro level and impact the profession in various ways. Usually they have columns contributed by thought leaders in the profession and include book reviews for a wider variety of professional and scholarly literature. Reading through a publication like College and Research Libraries News, which is an open access publication, is a great way to develop a broad understanding of what is impacting academic libraries now and how the profession is attempting to deal with it. Similarly, another publication produced by ACRL, College and Research Libraries, is a peer-reviewed scholarly journal, which is also open access. This is a highly impactful journal and is a great resource to search within or browse for peer-reviewed articles related to your professional interests. Of course, there are many other peer-reviewed journals to read, browse, or search, but it's nice to have such a great resource for the academic and research library discipline, like college and research libraries, available open access to generate research ideas when you're first starting in these positions. Even if you're unable to attend conferences, the conference programs are available online. You can search through programs to identify topics of interest, look at who is presenting, and then search for their writing, other types of output, and their social media personae. Following those whose professional or scholarly contributions are of interest to you is a great way to not only develop additional understanding in the field, but also to build a social network. So similar to always be reading, always be writing, as you identify publications to read for furthering your interests, you can look for opportunities to contribute to them as well. Many professional literature publications have editors whose contact information is listed in the publications for just this purpose. Don't be afraid to reach out if you have an idea, to pitch it and see where it might lead. You can take a similar approach to contributing to scholarly publications. Many have columns or review sections that often solicit for participants. There's no harm in putting yourself out there and putting your ideas forward as well. You can begin to develop and submit proposals to present at conferences that you may already be attending or would like to attend, both in person and virtually. Conferences usually have a number of different avenues for presenting, from formal stand in front of the room, didactic presentations, to poster sessions, roundtable discussions, workshops, and the like. If you're not sure where to start, you can take a look at what you've been reading, think about how you may be seeing what you're reading about reflected in your current work or current position, and explore that experience. Chances are others will be interested in learning about that experience. Conference presentations are often a great first step in developing what may eventually turn into a peer-reviewed journal article. And speaking of peer-reviewed journal articles, these are often, but not always, the bedrock of what may be considered scholarship for tenure-track positions. It can be very intimidating to think about how to get started with approaching a research project whose intended output is an article. So I encourage you to look at this as a whole process, one that starts from a question and ends in a publication, but can have many different stops along the way. Any of those stops can have their own quote-unquote output, perhaps a roundtable discussion, a poster presentation, a conference paper. Each of these can be an opportunity to further hone the research with an eye toward that final goal. It will take time, years even, given your work position, the level of support that your institution might provide, but it's a worthwhile endeavor to undertake if you think you may pursue a tenure-track position. As someone who has sat on a number of faculty librarian search committees, seeing at least one peer-reviewed article on an applicant's CV regardless of what kind of position they're currently in, provides a certain level of confidence in their potential to be successful in a tenure track position. If you're not quite ready to find avenues to write or present publicly, or even if you are, keeping what I'll call a professional journal can be a great way to keep track of your emerging professional and scholarly interests. Did you read a particularly provocative Twitter thread? You can capture that and actually write out your reactions to it. Having these kinds of thoughts time-stamped is a great way to see how your thinking or experience around an issue has evolved over time alongside the published or contributed output around this said issue. So service as a tenure-related activity can really vary depending on your institution. Generally speaking, it comprises membership to, active participation in, and demonstrable impact upon a particular professional association or a scholarly society. These organizations often have divisions, sections, committees, and/or working groups that relate to different aspects of the profession or discipline. They often require a paid membership, which can come with myriad benefits, including things like access to the professional literature that it publishes, discounts for conference attendance, and the opportunity to join the voluntary workforce of that association via committees. It is here where you can often find others in the profession who are interested in similar issues or are doing similar work, and is a great way to make connections with peers to eventually build a professional network. There are many different types of service opportunities, from event planning to bureaucratic policymaking, and even authoring some publications. For current students or those who may be underemployed, there are often discounts to membership to these organizations and more options for virtual attendance and participation. The library profession is one that values continuing education. There are numerous opportunities to further develop skills or knowledge in many different areas. Often the challenge here is in learning about them in the first place or keeping track of them. As you come across these opportunities, perhaps through your reading, writing, or service activities, think about applying to attend the ones that are of most interest to you. While these often require registration or perhaps travel expenses, you can always ask your employer about support or look for scholarship opportunities to attend. For those of you who may be new to scholarly research, I encourage you to explore the Institute for Research Design and Librarianship, or IRDL, which is an IMLS grant-supported 2-week immersive program where you can take a deep dive into research methodologies to explore a research idea or project. Most expenses are covered by the grant, which is a great benefit. The last point here is perhaps the most important, and it can be pursued at any point in your education or career. Building a network of professional colleagues has innumerable benefits. In addition to the social aspects of just knowing people when you might attend conferences or events, it is often through a network that opportunities to participate in any or all the activities I've discussed this far may come to you. The people with whom you may undertake a research study or present on a panel or organize a workshop just like this one are likely to come from the contacts you make in these spaces outside of your actual job. So as we've already established, it's often difficult to impose a one-size-fits most model when it comes to tenure-track librarianship. I did want to take some time to highlight some variations of expectations related to scholarship and service that may arise in these positions, as these are issues I myself have encountered in my career thus far. It is possible that a tenure-track position you may pursue has expectations that the scholarship and service you're doing must align to some degree with your positional responsibilities. In my current job, I represent the Ohio State University Libraries on several consortia committees. Being my organization's representative on these committees is a type of service, but I also look for additional opportunities for impactful participation, volunteering to serve on or lead small groups, task forces, etc., or even chairing membership meetings. This allows me some additional exposure to my peers in the field, and in particular, potential external evaluators when I come up for tenure. In addition, I am expected to conduct research and present findings related to collections work on behalf of my library. With these additional expectations, I had to realign my research agenda to be more inclusive of topics in this field. There are additional challenges when being in a tenure-track position while working as a manager or administrator. In addition to scheduling your own time to allow for working on scholarship and service opportunities, you must also find time among the regular support and guidance of your staff. This mostly boils down to time management and balance, which Karen will discuss in more detail, but it's important to highlight as the expectations for tenure are the same, regardless of your additional positional duties as a manager. The last issue I want to address is aspirational for me at this point, since tenure is still a year away for me. But one thing I think about pretty regularly. I've observed that once you are granted tenure, you're often enthusiastically volunteered by your colleagues to serve on the myriad committees and groups that only tenured librarians can serve on. While this can be stressful, you've put your head down for 6 years, you've achieved your goal of tenure, and now this. It does provide you with an opportunity to pass down your experience of recency. Since you just experienced the process, you are likely in the best position to provide support, mentorship, and advice to more junior colleagues who are still pre-tenure. Being tenured also allows you to pay it forward as an external evaluator for those at other institutions. Your great career achievement comes with the benefit of helping to evaluate others to hopefully achieve their goals as well.
All right, thank you, Jean. So this is a nice segue over from Jean's sections, and I'm glad he brought up the idea of mentorship because this is going to play into a lot of what I talk about. I'm going to focus first on strategies for working toward that elusive work-life balance. So here goes. I'm going to focus on strategies specifically for organization of research and work time, and then I'm going to talk about prioritization in your life. And I'm going to be the first to say that when you have a tenure track or a similar position, you're not going to have the kind of work-life balance where you can do everything you want as much as you want all the time. But I think that a realistic focus and a very positive one is on finding satisfaction on the way that you're prioritizing different components of your life. I've been involved with my university's Center for Faculty Development Tenure-Track Faculty Mentoring Program for almost 11 years now, 6 as a tenure-track mentee, and now almost 5 as a tenured mentor of new tenure-track faculty. Right now I have 3 mentees of my own, and they're all in departments outside the library. And let's see, I'm also a point person for new tenure track faculty who want to talk about issues related to parenting and tenure. And I'm the library's member of our campus level tenure evaluation committee. So those are the places where the thoughts I'm about to share are coming from. But I want to say that what I'm going to share applies no matter what your family status is or what the major components of your life are right now. So let's start by talking about organization and specifically maximizing the efficiency of your research process and your work time. Let's see if I can pull up, whoops, pull up a pointer here. Okay, cool. So I say this to my tenure track mentees practically every time we get together. Rule number 1 for making your research and your work time most efficient is know your departments and your university's requirements for tenure. Plan ahead in great detail. So what that means is if, for example, you know that you're going to be expected to have about 8 articles and 6 presentations ready by the time you go up for your tenure review, then you've got to think about what your timeline needs to be in order to accomplish that, and plan your timeline in great detail, prioritize based on those requirements specifically. Okay, so that's rule number 1. A close second is to always have multiple projects going on. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later. But always have a couple going on. And when you first start researching, begin one, and then a few months later, you should probably start a second one. I know that sounds overwhelming, but it'll work out. And this helps you to lose less time between projects and then also between stages of projects. Okay, then a close third most important rule is think about how you can make your work time as efficient as possible. And some of that starts to happen kind of naturally when you have a lot on your plate, but see what you can do in terms of work times, the location of where you're doing your work, and then how you divide up your time. And find your own tricks too, things that work just for you. For example, every night after my child goes to bed, I go through my work email again and I just respond to anything that I need to do, and I keep track of anything else. And for me, that's really key for keeping on top of my work. That's just something that I've found. Okay, another major component is finding partnerships for your research and then ultimately for the writing and presenting the result. working together on research in particular generally helps, although we all know that that can also be complicated. But aim to find reliable and supportive research partners, get started on a project, and then you can divide up the work, support each other in the work, and also hold each other accountable with the deadlines and check-ins. And then on a related note, consider joining what's called a writing circle. And these are groups where usually at a specific university or other institution, researchers from different departments will just get together every so often. They'll read drafts, they'll encourage each other, and then again, they'll hold each other accountable. And a lot of researchers credit their writing circles for their successes, especially early on in their careers. Okay, so we've talked about that organization part. I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about that prioritization bit. So I'm going to give you a challenge to try later on today. Okay. I'd like you sometime today think about what specific things would happen if you achieved reasonably good work-life balance. So what would some of the most specific signs of good balance look like in your life? For example, would you be writing 3 articles a year? Would you have a 2-week vacation every summer? Would you be home for dinner every night, except for maybe once or twice a month? And that last one is one that I've chosen in my life. So while your balance is not going to be perfect in reality, you can often do a lot to shape your life so that you get your most important couple of things, your most important 2 or 3 perhaps. And seeing yourself get those things can go a long way into helping you feel balanced and more satisfied. Okay, so women in particular who've been successful researchers over a long career, these are people I try to network with at my institution, they tell me stay organized in your work and in your life. And okay, here's a technique that I developed on my own. And then I happened to find out that a lot of the other mentors in my program developed really almost an identical thing independently as well. Okay, so here's a diagram. All right, so I like to keep my to-dos on a single sheet, and I have, you can see here, work to-dos and personal to-dos. And I also have a column of long-term tasks that I either need to keep in mind for the future or that I want to break down into smaller tasks that I can work on over time. Make sure that you're keeping track also of deadlines and then marking priorities. Every day I personally rewrite my list and I mark both the work items and the personal items that must be done today. And then I mark some others that I would ideally like to do today. But here's the key. While you're prioritizing, make sure to prioritize the important parts of your personal life too. Don't make it 100% about work. For example, every day I make sure I mark, personal stuff that must get done, like making a dentist appointment, but I also mark personal stuff that's really important or that has gotten pushed back for a while already, like calling a friend that I've been wanting to talk about. Well, you're not going to get to everything as quickly as you'd like. Keeping all those items together helps you to prioritize and feel like you're taking care of yourself to a greater degree. And I want to say one other thing kind of on the emotional side of things. I just wanted to acknowledge that if you're balancing a lot in your life, it can be kind of hard when you see colleagues or maybe friends in other professions who seem to really excel at one component or another of their lives. And, I can't say a whole lot to make that better, but again, if you're balancing a lot, take pride in the achievements that you're making in different areas of your life and celebrate the fact that you're taking care of a lot of stuff. Remember to prioritize those most important parts in all the areas of your work and your personal life, and also know that your balance might be different at different parts of your life. Okay, so now I'm going to shift over. Let's see if I can get rid of that pointer. Okay. Shift over to talking about tenure myths, phobias, and questions. So I speak to new tenure track faculty across my university frequently, and I also talk with a lot of MLS students who are curious about tenure track or similar jobs in academic libraries. These are some of the most frequent themes among the questions and concerns that all of those people share with me. please feel free to ask additional questions in the box or contact one of us later if you'd like to follow up. All right, so the biggest one that I get is, can I handle research and have a life as well? Yes, yes. I hope that you've gotten that message that you can too throughout this presentation. It's not super easy, but absolutely. So let me move on to another one. Okay, how would I get started with research the first time? And both Jean and I have alluded to this in different ways, but here's some concrete ideas. Pointer. Okay, so what I often talk with people about for their first research, their very initial research, plan out a project in great detail, do the best you can, and then share your ideas or your plans with an experienced researcher, an experienced librarian researcher perhaps, and offer to co-author with them. Make it clear that in this case, you would do the bulk of the work, but that you would like coaching and that you can offer them second authorship. So you would be the first author on the paper and they would be the second. That's a great way to get started, learn a lot, and get some coaching. And many experienced librarian researchers are totally into this. Okay, the second one we've already talked about a little bit, but stagger your projects. Again, always have probably 2 projects, maybe 3 going on in different stages. And the third one, Jean alluded to as well. This is good. So look for proposals, CFPs they're often called, journals asking for articles, editors of books asking for chapters, and professional organizations looking for some presentations. So these are opportunities where all those sources and people are seeking your work. Take those opportunities. Okay. Another one, people often say to me right at the beginning of their tenure track journey, 6 years to tenure is a really long time. How would I know that I'm doing okay along the way? Well, we mentioned earlier, you do tend to go through kind of a practice review about halfway to tenure, usually at the 3, possibly the 4-year part. So you make up a dossier showing all of your work, a couple binders highlighting your work, and you share them and that gets evaluated. So that's one thing. Also, at most jobs, you're going to go through annual evaluations, and they are a good indicator of how you're doing. Those will typically use criteria that are very closely related to your tenure criteria, and they give you a good idea of your progress, but do keep in mind that they don't absolutely guarantee that you will achieve tenure. So you can do well each year, but not quite make that tenure bar. However, they're typically a pretty good indicator of how you're doing. Okay, another one, talk with your chair or your dean or with a tenured colleague. Ask for some feedback. They're generally very enthusiastic. You may have to ask them for it. They may not jump out and offer it, but definitely take advantage of that one. Another one, mentoring. Seek mentoring from within your department in the library or ask at your university. Actually, those outside opinions are often very helpful, particularly because you can be very candid and you can also get that, that outside perspective, someone who's seeing it from a different light. Okay, here's one I've gotten kind of a lot recently. So what if scholarly publishing or presenting just isn't my thing? What if there's another format that I prefer? Could I still take a tenure track job? Okay, I have 2 answers to this. So the first one, when you're considering a tenure track job, and especially if you accept one, get to know the requirements very well. So if scholarly publishing or presenting are required, that's how you're going to be evaluated. There's really no way around that. They usually do not allow substitution for requirements. That's pretty strict. However, you're very welcome to do additional things. You can blog, you can do some professional social media, you can do creative work and so on. Just make sure you're on top of your tenure requirements as well, and you can do other things. Whether those additional things are worth credit really differs by institution, but yeah, just make sure that you're keeping up on the required stuff. All right, and the last one that I want to highlight, let's see. A lot of people say to me, I have really scattered interests. I'm interested in lots of stuff in libraries. Is that going to be a problem? Well, it's a little bit complicated. At most institutions where librarians have a research component, you would want to, or I'm sorry, you're required to have a research agenda. And that means that you choose one or two themes, generally closely related to the work that you do as your primary job. And then you pursue those over years of research and multiple projects. And yes, those themes can change over time, but they're solid for years at a time. So that means that most of your work, most of your research is going to be on those themes. And you can still occasionally do some things outside of those themes. Most of us tack on something additional here and there, but you'll be evaluated based on how well you pursue those themes and how cohesive your research is as a package over time. All right, so those were my myths and phobias and so forth. I hope that was helpful, and I'm going to kind of draw this to a halt and move back to Laura for our Q&A session.
All right, thank you. So, whoop, hang on, let me unmute. Can you guys hear me okay? Give me a little confirmation in the chat box if you can hear me. Yeah, okay, good. Just wanted to make sure since I hadn't spoken in a while. Thank you so much to our panelists. That was fantastic. We do have many questions that have come in over the course of the presentation. Big thanks to Christy for collating all those. I'm going to start just in the order they came in, and I will mention who they came in to, but other panelists should feel free to respond as they see fit. Before I do that though, panelists, can you confirm for me, are you able to unmute yourselves in our current status right now? If someone could just show me that you can do that. If I don't see anyone do that, I'll assume you can't. Okay, I'm assuming you cannot. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute Jean, because Jean, the first question came into you if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself. You had mentioned IRDL as a great way to kind of jumpstart research expertise, and a question came in about whether or not there are alternatives that you or other panelists might recommend. And the comment was that it's not a very inclusive program. I'm not sure exactly what was meant by the phrase inclusive, whether that's it's a small cohort, which it is, or something else. So feel free to chime in there.
Sure. I personally am not aware of another institute like that that is really dedicated. You know, it's a 2-week-long institute, so it would require some, travel, and time away from work and family and things like that. I'm not aware of another institute like that, but other types of professional associations that kind of have that type of activity would be within ALA, the Library Research Roundtable. They have mentoring opportunities, they have different service opportunities, and that is an arm of ALA that is really specifically focused on research. And so I would assume have programs and things like that that would be available. I personally am not aware of another institute kind of like RDL. I'm not sure if my panelists are.
Yeah, and I'll ask if Barbara, if you or Karen want to pipe up. And Karen, why don't you go ahead and unmute? And if Jean, Barbara, and Karen just want to stay unmuted for this session, I think that might work best. So y'all just jump in as you see fit. Anyone want to add to that?
I'm not aware of any additional ones either.
Nor am I.
All right, so there it is. Okay, I'm going to keep moving through these questions. So this one came in during Jean's portion of the presentation, but I think all of you may be able to answer this, panelists. Are there ways to break into research as a community college librarian where time and funds are limited? Anyone?
This is Barbara. Let me just give one idea. I mean, it's tough when time is limited and resources are limited. Sometimes if you can work on a research problem that centers upon a problem in the library itself, you can get some help from administration in terms of doing some research there. But and also sometimes you can work with colleagues outside of the library on research ideas and topics that pertain to community colleges. That might be one way of starting.
Yeah, I like that, Barbara. I was going to follow up and say that, a lot of really high quality research is done on a smaller scale. So still time intensive, but, not as extensive as working with hundreds of students at a time. I've seen a lot of really high quality, smaller, qualitative studies in particular coming out of community colleges. And, that's where a lot of our insight into working with diverse college student populations comes from. So I really encourage community college librarians to get researching.
Yeah.
Great, thank you both. Let's see, a question did come in, or just kind of a comment saying that this was at the very beginning of Karen's section, hoping that there would be discussion about the vital role of mentoring. I think you covered that, Karen, so I'm going to kind of move along with that and jump to the next, which was, let's see, a problem we've had at our university is the changing of tenure requirements by the university administration. So a librarian is 3 years in and suddenly the rules have changed. Now that didn't have a follow-up question, so I'll invite if y'all have any thoughts or comments on that situation at this time.
Well, we see that happen at our university, and I sit on that university-wide tenure committee. But typically, if the rules change partway through, you are allowed to decide on whether you want to be evaluated by the rules that you started with, so the rules that were in effect when you began, or whether you want to go by the new set of rules. Most people go with the rules that they were hired under. Jean and Barbara, do you have experience with that?
I'm go ahead, Gina.
I was just going to say, we just updated our patterns of administration, which govern our faculty status here in the libraries. We made some changes in terms of what counts for types of service. And that was approved by our university's Office of Academic Affairs. And because it happened, with our, a couple dozen people on the tenure track here, and I'm up for tenure next year, for instance, I could make the choice to go under the previous requirements because most of my time on the tenure track has been under those guidelines, or opt for the second one. I just have to alert my tenure initiating unit here in the libraries which requirement I want to be compared against.
Yeah, that's what I've seen too. If they're major changes, there's sometimes minor tweaks.
Yeah.
But if they're major changes, the term is grandfathered. You come in, you're evaluated on the one you came in under.
Excellent, thank you. All right, this is one that I imagine all of you can speak to if you feel so inclined. Do many universities offer a mercy year? In other words, the follow-up to that was, does pregnancy qualify you for a mercy year? And I might extend that question to maybe not just pregnant, but also if you're a father or a partner with someone who is expecting in your family.
I think most universities, or more and more of them, are looking at that, and they have some sort of flexibility that you would obviously have to apply for this. It wouldn't just be automatically granted. But if you had pregnancy, if you have paternity, maternity, whatever it would be, also illness in your family or illness yourself, you can ask for a sort of they call it stop the clock. So you stop the clock for a year, and then this clock resumes when you come back after a year. So I think that's more and more common.
Yes, we see all those situations here, all the ones you named.
And I'll just, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jean.
No worries, I was just saying same here.
Great. And I'll just make a quick note before going on to the next question. There's some great back channel conversation going on in the chat box. So for those of you, as questions are being asked, many of our attendees are chiming in with their experiences too. So take a look at that as you're listening to the panelists as well. Next up, if you accept a tenure track position, but in the second year you realize that it's not for you, can you leave the position, or do you need to wait until your contract ends? And that, I think, is one that we could invite all panelists to respond to. Gosh.
I think you could always leave. But you'd have to go somewhere else. You know, you probably come in with a 3-year contract. Do you think that's right, Jean and Karen, for your first job?
It sounds to me that usually it depends on what the details of the contract are, but most appointments, tenure track faculty status appointments, the contract is basically the agreement. It's at the time frame that your employing unit at the university has to evaluate you on, not necessarily your commitment on your end that you have to stay there for the length of that contract. And that's how I would interpret it. Obviously it's going to vary depending on the language of the contract, but usually that's how I would interpret it myself. Yeah, so you could, if it's not the right position for you, you should feel free to pursue another position as you see fit.
Great, thank you. The next one is one that's come up in a couple different contexts, I think, from the chat questions, and that is it normal to be told specific tenure requirements as far as the number of articles, etc., and what if that isn't given?
Typically, they're very specific, either in terms of the total number that are required by the time you go up for tenure or the total number per year. And there's usually a little bit of flexibility, but not a whole lot.
But you know, Karen, I've also seen lots of places it's not specific at all. It says a sufficient number. Yeah, and you have to decide what it is. But I think in that case, you obviously talk to your colleagues. I mean, what has been successful in getting tenure and what has not been successful. But a lot of places don't really want to pin themselves down so that you think if you've done 6 publications that you're assured of it. So it's that idea it's sufficient and of high enough quality. So they are vague, sometimes very purposefully, I think, very vague on that, which isn't easy, but you talk to your colleagues. And I think what you see more and more, just as you said, institutions are going away, making tenure requirements a little bit more flexible. And it doesn't always have to be peer-reviewed journals now. There's more the non-traditional scholarship they're talking about, the blogging, the new types of scholarship, which is also important. But it's sometimes it's very nebulous, like a lot of things in life.
Yeah, I'll say that the 2 institutions that I've worked in that have been tenure track, it's been vague. So you have general kind of, I would say, back channel conversations with colleagues who give you a general sense. But one thing I think you can do if you're interviewing for positions like this is to ask during the interview what the requirements or expectations are. And one difference that I've experienced from my previous institution to my current one is that my previous one, there was really pressure to solo authored peer-reviewed articles. And in my current institution, they encourage co-authorship and collaboration. And that was really important to me because I am collaborative by nature. I tend to want to work with people at different institutions or at my institution. So that was one of those things that I learned being in one position where the requirements weren't necessarily what aligned with kind of how I wanted to do my research. When I was seeking out a different opportunity, I asked that question specifically, and it's been my experience here as well that the culture kind of has confirmed what I had asked and was told during my interview process.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Before I move to the next question, I'll just go ahead and note that it is 2:58 Eastern time, I should say, where I am. I am not sure at what point Mariel from ACRL might give us the boot from this room because these can be heavily used for these types of online presentations and meetings. Panelists, I'm going to defer to you. We have a number of questions. Do y'all have a bit of extra time if we're able to stay in the room to answer more questions?
I do.
Sure.
Okay, great. I'll keep going. If you are needing to step away, attendees, thank you so much for coming. There will be an email follow-up after the session, probably early next week with the recording and an evaluation, and I'll start to include that intermittently in the chat box now as well. Next question I'm going to direct initially to Dr. Moran. Barbara, sorry, I should give the note that both Karen, Jean, and I all have experienced Barbara as our professor, so we have a hard time breaking the habit of calling her Dr. Moran. So, Barbara, I feel like library schools do students who are in the academic library track a disservice by not requiring quantitative/qualitative method classes. They're not training students to do faculty level research. Is that likely to change? Is there a recognition that this is a problem in LIS programs?
Well, that could be another whole program, couldn't it? I mean, you know, Laura, that UNC is one of the places that does require students to do research methods and require students to write a master's paper.
Right.
But there are many that don't, and I think more would, but there's usually library science programs are 1 year. People want to take lots of other courses, and it's very hard to make people understand the importance of it where they're in school. There is a lot of talk about it among library educators, but it's one of those things, there's no answer to it yet. And I'd like to hear some suggestions if people have them.
Barbara, I think it would be interesting if we could put together some better models for continuing education. So, once people get out there in the library world and they realize they'd like to be doing that research, we could come back and take some coursework and get some training. I think that would be excellent.
And of course, the thing is that all academic librarians are working in academic institutions, and all of them are offering research methods classes, qualitative, quantitative, and many have institutions on campus to help people do research. And even people who come without the background, if they can get involved after they get their job. And to me, what I always tell students, I think the worst thing for students is for new graduates is to go to a place and there's not support for people who are seeking tenure. I mean, you've got to be supported in getting more education. You've got to be supported and encouraged and help people learn to do research if they haven't done it before. You can't just say sink or swim. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, thank you all. Mariel from ACRL has confirmed that there's not a conflict with this room, so we can go for a few more minutes. I think out of respect for our panelists, we probably won't go past 3:10, 3:15 max, just so we can allow everyone to return to their day. But is that okay with you, Karen, Jean, and Barbara?
Sure.
Okay, great. Let's see. Where am I on my list? So this question is basically, how do you come up with your research ideas? And I know, Jean, you touched on this a bit in your section with Always Be Reading. Would you like to speak a little more, or other panelists? Happy to hear from you as well.
Sure, yeah, I feel like, I think Karen and or Barbara also kind of mentioned this a little bit. I think one of the things is, if you're really kind of stuck, always looking at what your work is and how you might approach questions or issues around your work is always a good place to start. And I think that's, anyone can do that really. I think that's one of the great things about the library science literature overall is that it is a blend of theoretical and practical. And usually we publish a lot of case studies, which are kind of tackling a particular maybe theory and its application in the workplace, or an idea that we're trying to work out to see how it might actually work in the real world. Those are all good types of things to look at, good types of articles to read to get a better sense of how others are approaching them, and also just how that output is structured. So you can get it if you're reading peer-reviewed articles that are case studies. You're looking at the format of how those authors structured that particular type of case study. In terms of the introduction, their research question, how they approached it, how they're reporting out the results in their analysis, as they use any particular methodologies, things like that. So that's always a great place to start. Also, I kind of mentioned before that building your professional network. I was able to maintain some really close friendships from my MLIS program. And, we would meet each other at conferences and just kind of talking about, that first 6 months after we graduated in our new jobs, issues that we were encountering. That started some of the idea generation for some of the early research in my career, just from talking to each other and kind of comparing notes of what we were seeing in the field around professional development and kind of exploring those options that way. So it can really kind of come from anywhere. I would say look pretty broadly about things that you're encountering on a daily, weekly, monthly basis in your job or in the profession as you're experiencing it. And there's chances are other people are facing that too and would want to explore that as well or read what you've written.
Jean, just to build on that, I think one of the things that are very helpful is the growing popularity of evidence-based librarianship, that you want to make decisions based on something rather than just what you think, your instincts.
Yep.
So that also can be a place that leads to research ideas.
I'm also a big fan of searching for holes in the literature. So what Jean was saying about looking for phenomena that happen in your workplace, in your classroom, if you do instruction or, whatever you work with, and then going back to the literature to try to see if anyone's written about this. That can take a while to discover, but, if you find something that no one's written about or no one's written about in a certain way, that's a big opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you. And checking the time, I think we will keep going a bit more. How do you find a mentor when you're middle-aged, mid to late career, and everybody only wants to mentor young/early career librarians? And this comes from someone who is a librarian but is hunting for a new position and may land at a tenure track institution.
Well, I hope it's not true that people only want to mentor young people. I mean, I think sometimes you look at young people, especially from a certain perspective, and think, "Gosh, they need help. They're very young." But I think we should all be, looking at people who are in our workplace who need help. And the other thing is, oftentimes you sometimes don't know people need mentors. They have to indicate they want one. So just making an appointment. If you're interested in a mentor, ask someone to go out for coffee with you and talk to them, and just talk to them about some of your questions and concerns, and see if it just doesn't develop naturally.
Yeah, I would also add, kind of alluding to something that Barbara's saying, peer mentoring programs could be a good match as well. A lot of universities, and I'm not sure if ALA has some, but where you match up people where there's no specific mentor and mentee, you just get together with your partner or call each other or whatever and talk about the things that you need advice on, but you're sharing, you're benefiting each other equally. Be a good match.
Excellent. Thanks to both of you. Let's see. Question about, what if someone else is doing work on one of your research agenda ideas/themes? I suspect this is in the context of whether or not your work would still be seen as equally valuable if someone is already engaged in that agenda. But feel free to interpret the question more broadly if you feel so inclined. To any of you.
If you have a collaborator. I mean, it seems to me that it's wonderful if somebody's working in the same area, and usually you can carve out your own part of it. But it's one of the nice things is to have somebody who has similar interest in research, and either you can work collaboratively or you can encourage one another and learn from one another. But obviously you can't do exactly what somebody is doing. I mean, that would be a problem. The worst thing would be to have your research project all lined up and begin to collect your data and discover somebody has just done what you're doing. But let's hope that doesn't happen too frequently.
I think one of the things that I think by nature, most people will approach a similar research question differently. And so I think a lot of it might just come down to, what is the actual research question that you're asking? And then what might be the pathways forward through the research process, whether that be maybe a different theory to apply, a different research methodology, to answer or address that question. There's different ways that you can kind of tackle the same kind of very broad research question in different ways. I do agree with Barbara that I have in the past, through maybe that reflecting and reading the literature, generated some research ideas. And then when I start to explore them, I see other people have already worked on them. Maybe they did a study 5 years ago that really addressed exactly what I was interested in. And one of the things you can do, you can always reach out to people and say, hey, I came across your article. I'm interested in this as well. Were you planning to do a follow-up study to this? Are you doing other research in this area? And one of the things that I found really encouraging, in our community of librarian researchers is that sense of collaboration. Of course, people are always going to be a little territorial over their ideas, but if you approach someone kind of with well, this is how I'm looking at this, you might have an opportunity for a collaboration there that you maybe wouldn't if you just kind of shut it down and moved on to, the next one on your list. So I definitely encourage you to reach out to people. Everyone is in their own kind of trajectory in their career and in their research agendas. And someone might have already moved on to something else and might want to pass along other information to you to help you be more successful with that project. So it never hurts to actually contact people and try to have a conversation with them.
Excellent. Well, I think we better call that the last question. There are, unfortunately, a few more that I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to in terms of time, but As you all can see as attendees, Karen, Jean, and Barbara have generously provided their email addresses. So if you have specific questions for them, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to answer those. So with that said, let me just thank our panelists again so much for taking the time to share their knowledge and expertise in this area today. Thanks too for Christy and her work collating all these questions and keeping them organized. You know, that's always helpful, but today was a very high volume question session, so this was very important that we had her doing that. And thanks again to Mariel and the other members of the ACRL staff who make all of this possible. Reminder, I've put it in several times, I'll put it in once more right now. If you could please take time to fill out that session evaluation, we'd appreciate it. And I'll also share that we do have another session from the ACRL ULS Professional Development Committee next week. It is called Policy and Communications for an Accessible Library. It'll be presented by Angie Brunk, and that's on Tuesday of next week, the 11th at 1 p.m. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that information in the chat box here too for you, including the link for registration if you're interested. Thank you so much. We will have more programs in the spring from this committee, and we hope you'll consider attending some of those too. And one last time, thank you to our presenters, and we hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.